Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So as you can tell, based on the title, today we're going to be talking about Prada's Fall/Winter 2025 collection. So we'll talk about the fashion, some of the themes being conveyed here, as well as the handbags. Now, when it came to the fashion, I noticed immediately with the first 4 looks, as well as many looks afterwards, there was a lot of black. There's also a lot of brown, a lot of black, and one of the themes was about questioning femininity, or like interrogating femininity was the term I saw. Of course, the black dress has become a very quintessential item that many women have in their wardrobe. Chanel, Audrey Hepburn, these very classical interpretations come to mind. But these silhouettes, the term I saw was rescaled. They weren't form-fitting, they were quite loose, but they also implied that they could be actually quite comfortable. A lot of the hems looked raw and unfinished. Throughout the collection, we saw more black, like this knitwear piece, this coat with this faux fur trim, lots of faux fur in this collection. We even saw that on the men's side, and we're seeing it here. Another black coat, the suit set. These might be even very dark gray, or the light is really like reflecting off the wool, so it looks maybe a charcoal to like black is what we're seeing here. And this gather dress, honestly, some of these looks feel like, just with like the oversizedness, feel like they could come from, if I think about a brand like the Row, right? But I think Prada brings in this interesting like retro chic vibe. We also have this very thick grain leather coat. I don't know what kind of leather this is. When I think of really thick grains, like I think of like a buffalo, but this looks even like thicker. This maybe is intentionally exaggerated. And then this cute bow dress with this raw hem, this black dress, another black dress, another faux fur coat, another black coat, and another. So yeah, a lot of black in this collection. When I think of brands that do a lot of black, I think of the Row, Yohji Yamamoto. I think what Prada does is they kind of take those retro moments and modernize them. We also saw a lot of browns, and the browns were mixed with a lot of other colors. Here we have this brown PJ top, and this was also a theme in the men's collection, like a lot of pajama inspired looks with that PJ trim, and just this really unusual gathered waist. Again, going back to this idea of confronting femininity or questioning femininity, doesn't really create that usual hourglass cinched in waist look. It actually like bunches up, and it kind of goes against what we would think would be a quote like attractive or a quote flattering silhouette. This feels like it's going against that. Also, just a side note, we're seeing a lot of these pinks and browns together. I feel like this is a styling color combination trend we're also seeing. Also, more faux fur. This is super interesting with this plastic coating, kind of a lot of plastic. Another look, we've got this again gathered pajama skirt. I'm sure a lot of people would say this is very unattractive. I think what Prada does is we have ideas, ways of styling, or interesting articles of clothing more so in their like raw forms, and then in a couple seasons later, or even like the next season, we'll see something like a brand like Dior. They'll do something maybe similar to this, but it will feel a little bit more put together, a little bit more palatable for the masses. Or it's sometimes done in the reactionary way, because when I think about like these pajama tops, like I think of a brand like Totem that have been doing this for so long. This trend of nightwear as daywear is something that I've seen expressed at other brands, but I do appreciate that Prada's willing to make something look a little bit more raw and challenge what we think of as beautiful, or maybe the beautiful things that we like are actually quite ugly. Next, we have this boxy fur coat, also the fur accents on the lapel. Here's another version of this, another one of these thick grain jackets, quite a generous fit, comes with this matching scarf neck tie thing. Then another brown dress, doesn't really look like it fits in a very conventional form-fitting way that accentuates her form. Some people might look at that and say it's quite frumpy. Another coat with this faux fur trim, and it's really like bunched up, kind of similar to some of the coats that we saw in that men's collection. And then we've got this gathered brown skirt with this pale pink top worn with this gray herringbone pattern kind of coat, and then another brown skirt, and then we have this brown leather A-line gathered skirt. Then we've got this deep chocolate brown coat. Now, it wasn't just black dresses and brown furry coats and gathered waist skirts. Had some other colorful moments. We had blues, we had reds, we had this kind of like acidic green. But in the middle of this whole collection, there was this moment where there were these models and they were wearing these dresses with florals, not even just like the floral dresses, it's just like the combination, the juxtaposition of these models with this intentionally ragged looking hair. They just almost look like these disturbing cartoon suburban housewives. It reminded me of that scene in Edward Scissorhands where there's those suburban housewives, but it's just also so strange because the models throughout this whole collection, they had like these overly lined eyebrows, but I thought these dresses were just so striking and just amazing to see on the runway. It was just such a contrast. Really enjoyed these looks. Now when it came to shoes, we had loafers, different versions of loafers, these interesting peep toe loafers, boot loafers, and then these heels that had this like very visible seam down the center, very worn in. Again, that kind of like a worn in look. We also saw that in the men's collection. Now when it came to handbags, first we saw this white shoulder bag, very quite ladylike, very elegant, minimal. It's got this brassy antique gold hardware. Another similar version in more of an east-west proportion. It also comes in a black and a brown. We also saw this east-west ruche bag, very interesting, very thin straps. Makes it quite dainty. You wouldn't really want to carry anything too heavy. The next bag here, we've got two straps, so a little bit more support here, but this bag to me, again, it goes with Prada's, I think, like retro chic aesthetic. Sometimes can be on the minimal side, sometimes not. I'm not sure if it's the lighting, but also the hardware, the silver and gold. They're using two different hardwares on this bag. And then we've got this really pretty, this deep red suede bag, again with those thin straps. And then more of these shoulder bags, but instead of those thin leather straps, we've got these thin chain straps. Next, we've got this east-west tote. And then next we have this bucket bag with this thin chain strap, very ultra thin. Again, these kind of like thin chain straps we'll see throughout the collection. And then we've got this like burnished caramel brown leather bag. It would be a high up shoulder style, again with the gold and silver hardware. Not sure if that's like intentional, but it's kind of interesting they're doing that. And we've also got a black version, but that black version, it's all silver hardware. Interesting there. Next we have this ruched, gathered, slouchy style, and then it's got these ultra fine chain straps. This vibe feels very different from the style that we saw a few years ago. I think about how Prada will also be the kind of brand that does a lot of those sporty utility straps with like buckles with the nylon. That's one side of Prada, but then they also do these very delicate lady bags. This feels very like Mucha Prada to me. We've got in this like swampy green, that brown, this red. I really like that shade of red. And then we've got these east-west bowling bags. So we've got it in suede, we've got it in this brown suede, this red suede, and then we've also got it in this black version. I feel like you would be able to find like vintage styles, or like this is definitely like a throwback, reissue, evolution on style they've had in the past for sure. The bowling bag is something I think of recently. We've seen in more like sportier iterations. And then it looks like another nylon bag here. And then this super interesting style, this like gathered nylon pouch with this metal ball. Very interesting silhouette. The silhouette kind of reminds me a little bit, kind of different, but like similar to the interesting Gucci bag that was like this pouch, and the horse bit secured the pouch in a way. It reminds me, I had an Alexander Wang bag. I actually still think I have this bag. It was like pouch style, but then it had this ring where you would weave the handles through the metal hardware detail. Similar kind of concept here. It also looks like it comes in a black and a khaki kind of olivey color as well. Overall, a lot of shoulder bags, a lot of these thin, delicate straps, a lot of white bags, which were interesting. Of course, we also saw blacks, burnished caramel browns, suede brown, suede red, that swamp green. Overall, while nothing is really speaking my name, I did like some aspects of the bags. That dipped in bag with the gathered sides with the chains, I thought that was kind of cool. I thought the pouch with the ball chain, that was an interesting silhouette, but I don't know if I was like 100% sold on these styles. Just for me personally, I like the lady like retro chic styles quite a bit, but I think my issue with Prada, every time I'll see these bags in person like 6 months later and they just never really 100% do it for me. I'll like aspects of the bag, but maybe it's just not the whole design. Now, another major theme that was expressed in this collection was this idea of, quote, interrogating femininity. Of course, a lot of people probably say that these looks are very, quote, frumpy, and to me it's very funny because sometimes sometimes I'll talk about a brand like The Row, and if I get a critical commenter, it's how, quote, like frumpy the clothes look. To me, they look very beautiful, but again, they are quite oversized and sometimes like gathered in very unusual ways. But again, I think they look quite beautiful. But I also think this is a reminder of like femininity, something that is very subjective. Of course, there are, quote, traditional views of femininity, like the trad wife. I think we're seeing a huge cultural return to that, a political return to that. When I was thinking about feminine, like what is feminine, just Googling it, just from this like Oxford first Google result, it's, quote, having qualities or an appearance traditionally associated with women or girls, quote, a feminine frilled blouse. So we didn't see any feminine frilled blouses on the runway here, but there were some really cool accessories, really cool like necklines, and just like the styling of the hair. It was done in a way that was quite messy. Again, there's this expectation that women should look super proper and done up, but these women, they look quite messy. They didn't look, quote, put together. I will always have so much respect for Mucha, Prada, as well as Raf Simons. And I think of this idea of interrogating femininity and looking at what is ugly. I definitely associate that with Mucha, Prada, the both of them, for wanting to go against the grain. Even though most of the time I would probably say that I don't really like everything. Maybe I warm up to some of these pieces, but maybe 6 months later when I see it in store, I never really feel that compelled to buy it. But I respect Mucha, Prada. She's in her 70s and still wanting to question these ideals. Sometimes fashion isn't really interested in that. Sometimes it is, but like I would say at this height of luxury fashion, you don't really see it that much. Probably you could say that this is an idea that she's talked about before. We've seen this on the runway before, but you're probably right. It's kind of an exhausting conversation at the same time. Just thinking about what advancements have been made in terms of inclusivity, diversity. We're seeing a lot of these advancements be rolled back. And one thing I will say, if I'm going to just be a little bit critical for a moment here, of course, we're talking about confronting femininity and interrogating this idea of what being feminine is. I do think it could go a little bit further. Sure, the models have messy hair, overdrawn eyebrows, they kind of look a little frumpy, but I just think it could go further. And this is not exclusive to Prada, but when we're talking about interrogating femininity, the relationship women's bodies have with their clothes, they could interrogate this further in terms of age, in terms of size diversity. But of course, this is something that exists throughout the industry. Although I will say, I just saw the Fendi show. That felt like a greater representation. I loved when Miu Miu had that doctor slash fashion influencer, and she's in her 70s, walk the runway. That was phenomenal. I also think Prada deserves credit for bringing on Hunter Schafer. She's a trans actress and model. She was at the show and she's one of the faces for the brand, but she recently posted how, due to the current administration's executive order on her passport, again, on her passport, it's listed as male, which it just feels like things are going backwards. So again, while these themes of interrogating femininity, this is a discussion that we have to keep having. It feels exhausting to have, but it's also something that keeps happening just because it feels like we're just going backwards. Prada reminds us it is important to question traditional ideals, representations, and these expectations of femininity. Here we are seeing Prada deconstruct these stereotypical ideas of what it means to be, quote, feminine in this term that I'm seeing, which is, quote, raw glamour. This is something Mucha Prada has done in the past before, and I don't think femininity should ever really have this like rigid idea. I think femininity can be soft and romantic, but it can also be aggressive and strong. It can be all natural or it can be completely modified. It can be a variety of different sizes and shapes. It can be young, it can be old. And even though this is like an ongoing discussion, femininity can absolutely be this incredible source of empowerment and rebellion. But I also think it can be a tool of oppression when used to specifically police, judge, or exclude other women. And I think the key question is who benefits from these divisions. Often societal structures, they profit from keeping women opposing each other. Prada reminds us it is important to question traditional ideals, representations, and these expectations of femininity. So yes, that's my video for today. I would love to know your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!